Hey folks, Rich here, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. Recently I got a phone call from a member who was baffled because his bees were all over a gumbo limbo tree and there were no flowers on the gumbo limbo tree. And I went, oh, okay. And I explained the problem to him. And so I figured I'd explain it to you. Recently, there's been a lot of buzz, pardon the expression, about honeydew honey. And no, it has nothing to do with honeydew melons and, nectar from honeydew melons. Honeydew is a secretion of insects that are piercing insects on plants. That is aphids and scales and whitefly, particularly important in South Florida, whitefly. You'll understand why in a minute. All these different insects that pierce the skin of leaves and suck the sap. They suck the sap and they poop out sugar. You'll find that people who actually market honeydew honey don't call it honeydew honey because they don't want to get confused. They usually call it forest honey. And that's because there are parts of the world, a lot of it in Europe and some parts of the United States too, where you have high concentrations of certain kinds of trees like beech trees and oak trees and such that have a fairly high concentration of sap sucking insects, and they secrete sugar
On the leaf?
onto the leaf below usually, though usually they won't let them get there. So that's why I want you to get close-up pictures. See these bright green leaves, but see the ones that have a lot of black on them. Okay, like this right here. Now watch what happens when I just wipe it with my fingers. It just comes right off, as you see, because what you're looking at there, come over here and see this, what you're looking at is sooty mold. And so if sap sucking insects, aphids and such, I know some of these leaves up here are pretty good on that. These are the youngest, brightest, newest leaves. They don't have heavy infestations yet, but you see these little dark spots here? These are actually scale insects. I'm going to see if this works for us. In here, okay, so the black dot, you moved on me, come on.
Tell us what we're looking at.
Well, you're just looking at some scale insects. They'll be very flat and right on the rib. Some of them will be almost transparent when they're younger, and then when they get older, they will start to get a little crustier looking, and it's easier to see them. And you don't have to see them. If you see this, if you see all of this black sooty mold fungus, which watch as I just wipe it off with my finger, you'll see that the leaf underneath here is not damaged because what's causing this is coming from the leaf above it. There are insects that are pooping out sugar and it lands on the leaf below. If you come out early in the morning, you can even see a glistening of fresh sugar on there, like somebody had taken a sugar water solution in a sprayer and sprayed it. You'll actually see a shimmering glistening like that before the fungus absorbs that as well. And that can be caused by scale insects like this is here. It can be caused by all manner of aphids, and it can be caused by whiteflies. And the reason the whitefly is particularly important down here is for our South Florida viewers. You'll remember some years ago we had a tremendous problem with ficus whitefly, right? And just hundreds of thousands of yards of hedges all over South Florida were dying from this ficus whitefly. And developments paid huge amounts of money to keep these hedges treated with imidacloprid or isotox, orthene, orthonex, whatever, to save them while the laboratory people were working up a thrip that came in and attacked the whitefly and killed it. There's no such thing as getting rid of all of it. Everything kind of comes back into balance and you can learn to live with it. And the ficus came back to good health. The same thing happened with gumbo limbo trees. Gumbo limbo trees are ubiquitous down here. They're everywhere, you know. And it's not just where they're planted. They're one of the native trees that finds our urban environment a very good, conducive place to just popping up in hedge lines and behind air conditioners and whatever. And as they get big, which doesn't take long, they will get infested with all kinds of different things, and they will all be pooping sugar.
And what has this got to do with the bees?
What this has to do with the bees is the fact that the bees are more than happy to harvest that sugar and take it back to the hive, and that is what is called honeydew.
Does it taste weird?
It is, that depends on who you're asking. I mean, if you've watched Bob Binney videos on this, it's like, this stuff is terrible. No, it's just not clover honey, basically. It is dark and it is rich and it is smoky. And I think that all of my honey is dark and rich and smoky because there is a proportion of my honey which is coming from honeydew. And probably for everybody down here, my honey is very dark and very rich and it's very multifloral. But sometimes a year there is probably a lot of honeydew going into it. Okay, now,
so it isn't necessarily a bad thing.
There are those who would say it's a bad thing, and there are those who say it's an opportunity. Now, the interesting thing is that there are a number of insects causing, and a number of trees causing this in New Zealand, and they're claiming that their honeydew honey, that is their forest honey, has more antibiotic and antibacterial effects than even the Manuka honey does.
Oh, so maybe ours does too.
Ours probably does too.
Have
yeah.
they actually proven that, or is this just a claim?
There are research studies which seem to show that there are a lot of beneficial aspects to the forest honey. We'll just call it that to prevent any confusion. And it's being marketed that way. But I think that really is just, I think my honey has a fair amount of honeydew to it. It makes for a richer, muskier flavor. But is it dangerous? No. Now, let's get to the downside of this whole thing. We're in the urban environment. And when you start seeing, 150 feet of hedge dying, you are more than likely going to get somebody to come out and spray it. Okay? And whether they're using an imidacloprid-based product, whether they're using an acephate-based product, an organophosphate, or whatever, the tests that are done to determine whether honeybees are susceptible to this stuff is active chemical mixed in a precise amount into a precise sugar water mix and fed to the bees. All of these seem to claim that at normal levels, and I don't even know what that word normal means in this case, aren't terribly detrimental to bees, but at 4 times that rate, that is 100 versus 400 parts per million, that it can seriously affect the lifespan of the bees, the ability of the bee to orientate, all this sort of thing. The problem is that this isn't what we're looking at with this. If you spray this, okay, fine. 24 hours later, the active ingredient has been broken down by sunlight if it wasn't absorbed. And the bees are eating a sugar that is being excluded or extruded by that insect. And since the chemical is in the plant to kill that insect, it has to be at a fairly strong dosage to kill the insect. Now, the bright side of this is that it's probably only going to be 1 or 2 days that you're going to get the poisoned effect on the nectar that's being brought back into the hive. And if they're bringing in other things from other places, hopefully that waters it down. But it can affect the vigor, health, lifespan, sleep cycle, all kinds of things. Doesn't necessarily kill it outright, but it can have a detrimental effect to the overall health and vigor of the bee and the hive. So if you have bees that aren't acting right for no particularly understandable reason during this time of year, particularly, it could be that somebody is spraying uh, trees or hedges within a 3 mile area of you that have a lot of sucking insects on them. So this is just something to be aware of. I mean, before I was a beekeeper, if I saw any of this on my plants, particularly my gardenias, even then I was aware of bees, and I'd say to myself, well, bees don't like gardenias, so I don't have a problem. And I would treat them in the spring to stop this problem from happening. It didn't occur to me the bees might go after the sugar that was on the underside of that leaf. So be aware, be cautious, be aware there's probably not much you can do about it either way. Just remember that there are things out there in our South Florida environment, particularly in the spring, that could be detrimental to your bees, because most residential homeowners don't do a whole lot of spraying. But if a condominium complex has thousands of feet of hedge that are all the same kind of hedge, the city I used to work for, after this problem with whitefly came on board, we started requiring that all this thousands and thousands of feet of ficus hedge be replaced with a minimum of 5 different species of hedge in sections of no more than 200 feet each. So that in the future, if some other insect came in and did the similar thing, they wouldn't lose more than a fifth of their hedges instead of losing 100% of them. Okay? So, just some information for you out there. Most important thing is, if you're seeing black sooty mold on the leaf and you rub the leaf and the leaf is bright and shiny underneath, this one felt pretty, not gone from underneath. No, not bad. Just be aware that somebody might spray something. Otherwise, you're liable to be getting a nice dark honey with a very rich and smoky flavor to it, and it might be from from insect poop. So that's it. This has been Rich, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. A real simple take on this, but something everybody needs to be aware of. Bye bye.